Welcome to the Irish Farmers Journal Weekly Podcast, brought to you by Ornua, the home of Irish dairy.
Hello, this is Thomas Hubert, Digital Editor with the Irish Farmers Journal. Welcome to our weekly podcast. The harvest season is just starting, and we have data on the various areas of crops planted this year in this week's Irish Farmers Journal. I sat down with our tillage editor Andy Doyle to go through the figures.
Well, harvest has sneaked up on us as it always does. Winter crops probably starting this week. We know there's a little bit of winter barley after being harvested. We know there's an amount of winter barley that has already been harvested for whole crop. And there will certainly be other guys in a few areas of the country going out this week whenever the opportunities present themselves. But a lot of people still won't be looking at winter barley harvest until next week, and for some it will be the week after. So we're still a bit away from the bulk of harvest. We don't really have any quantity of crop cut to kind of gauge it. It's not uncommon that the very first of the crops come in will have some kind of problem or other, and you often find that they won't be great crops. They won't be necessarily representative of what's happening locally or what the national picture will be, or at least we would hope that if they were poor, and hope for even better if they were good.
Another important set of figures that goes with that is how much people actually planted of each crop, and the data from the BPS applications is now available. We have them in the Farmers Journal this week. What can you see? What are the main trends from those numbers, Andy?
On the crop side, Thomas, the most obvious thing is a very significant drop of about 16,000 hectares in spring barley, resulting in a net drop of about 6,000 hectares in the area sown to cereals. Some of the spring barley drop was taken up by winter crops such as winter barley, winter wheat, a bit more winter oats about. More of it was taken up in the springtime by other spring crops, specifically beans, which have increased significantly, and also spring oilseed rape. We were giving messages all spring about the poor prospects that were there for spring barley, and we were suggesting to people that between a combination of price and cost that they might be better off either not planting some land or planting it to other crops. One of the opportunities that opened up in that market was oilseed rape, and a number of people certainly took that advice on board, and the area of spring oilseed rape is up significantly. It's still not a big acreage. It's only up by about something under 1,000 hectares, but it reflects real decisions that are being made for good reasons in the season that's in it. And it's good to see people making those hard decisions because we're not always that comfortable with them. So cereals were back, proteins were up indeed. Many people would be interested in the fact that the overall protein area would appear to have passed 12,000 hectares, and 12,000 is the threshold for maximum aid. So if all of the acres are accepted into the system, then there will be a small penalty on the protein producers this year, in contrast to a significant bonus that was paid last year. But it's not very much, it's less than 2%. It's still important for the protein crops that aid be there in order to help the profitability of that crop option.
Now, what about the ratio between crops and grassland? Have you seen any evolution there this year especially?
Well, last year in the figures that I have, I wasn't given the numbers for grassland, but this year's set of data from the Department of Agriculture is extremely comprehensive. It accounts for about 4.6 million hectares of land use in all kinds of categories, and unquestionably the biggest single land use is grassland. Between the different categories of grass, rough grazing, etc., there's over 4 million of the 4.6 million hectares used for that purpose. The planting of new grass, as in what is now called grass 1, grass 2, grass 3, over the last number of years would indicate that there was an increase in grass planting for the past 3 years. And that certainly wouldn't surprise anybody, because we all know that land did move use from tillage to grassland specifically for dairying in those years. And the planting area this year was similar to the last 2 years, and therefore the suggestion would be that some of the net loss in hectares to crops will also have ended up in grassland, new grassland again this year, or at least that's my assumption.
Okay, and finally, Andy, you've been spending the past week or two in the US. We followed your travels there online. You're traveling with the Irish Tillage and Land Use Society. What did you see there in terms of how American farmers are gearing up for this year's harvest and what their outlook is?
Well, Thomas, it's commonly known that American farmers have produced a very good wheat crop. They planted somewhat fewer acres because wheat hasn't been their most profitable crop in recent years, but the acres that they planted did well. The combinations of heat, moisture, etc. took the crop into a good crop. I say it like that because earlier this year the wheat crop was, or a part of it at least, was suffering significantly from drought, but it recovered well from early spring rains, and it has been a good crop in US terms, giving them, I think, if I'm not mistaken, a record yield from their wheat crop in the US. So while the acreage fell, once again we've seen a situation where the overall crop size has increased in the face of lowering acreage. They also subsequently planted an increased area to corn this year, corn being maize for us, as in grain corn, and it's looking pretty good. I couldn't honestly say from the areas that we were in that it's going to be a record crop, and neither was anybody saying there that it would be a record crop. But many parts of the US got plenty early season moisture, and that's critical for establishment. Planting dates were early to average. Some people got finished very early and other people got finished on about average dates. In other words, there's no reason to expect that late planting would be a penalty to yield potential. But the month that we're in, July, is a critical month. As we left in early July, the earliest of the corn in the northern part of the corn belt was tasseling. So further south again, down through Missouri, Nebraska, into northern Kansas, it will have gone beyond this. Well, it'll be tasseling to flowering, and high temperatures during flowering generate a lot of stress for the crop. Basically, the silks can dry out very quickly on the cobs, and you get poor fertility on the cobs, and that's where yield potential can be limited by severe weather being heat, and heat almost regardless of whether there is moisture or not. While moisture is frequently a limiting factor for them in the US, it's thought nowadays not to be as big a factor. The genetics, or the base of the genetics, seems to have improved to cope better with more moisture stress than crops would have done a decade ago. So for the moment they're looking at another big corn crop. Bigger acreage, even on average yield, will give a very big crop outlook. But the weather this month and next month may influence that, would influence it certainly if it was adverse.
Okay, Andy, thank you very much. There's a lot more from the US coming up in your reporting in the Farmers Journal in the coming weeks, and all about harvest starting and crop acreage in this week's Farmers Journal. Thanks, Andy.
Thanks, Thomas.
You're listening to the Irish Farmers Journal podcast, brought to you by Ornua, the home of Irish dairy.
The consequences of the Brexit referendum are still being explored, and my colleague Odile Evans was at a livestock show in Birmingham last week. There, she met Darren Hopkins, a Welsh sheep and beef farmer who voted to leave the EU.
The pound is too strong, was one. And the other one was immigrants was a big factor as well. But the European government had too much powers.
Did farm subsidies have any sway in it for you?
Well, it was an issue that I thought of. But hopefully the money that we were putting into Europe, if we could spend it on, so we were putting more in than what we were having out. So if we could spread it about with the national health and put it into farming and give it to the farmers that need it, not like the hill farmers that are struggling with the lamb prices and stuff, is to try to get it around them more than the big boys with the corn and whatever. But the livestock, they need feeding 24/7. As we're always spending money on the livestock, and I thought that that's why I wanted us to have more power, that we could spread it out more equally. And we find it that we're on a disadvantage to anyone else because we can't produce the stock, the amount of stock on the acreage that the lowland farmer can do, as he can do 3 times the stock because he's got better quality ground, and yet we're getting penalised because the lamb prices are so down, as he could produce 3 proper lambs quicker than we could produce one. Everyone I talk to were out in our area. I think I'm happy the other way out, because now we're on a different playing field, and we were always on the back foot to the rest of Europe anyway, because they're in a better climate than us, basically for growing things. They were on that advantage, and our pound was so strong. And I think now that the pound has dropped, I might have shot myself in the foot, but I think it's worth a gamble to see, give it 3 or 4 years and see how it got the subsidies in 2019 anyway. So now's the time to go. It was either now or never, and I think we can adjust as we go along. I think others are going to go as well.
We hope that you're enjoying this Irish Farmers Journal podcast, brought to you by Ornua, the home of Irish dairy. Find out more at farmersjournal.ie.
Brexit was one of the hot topics when IFA President Joe Healy attended the association's Offaly County Executive meeting on Monday night. My colleague Anthony Jordan also asked him about his ongoing campaign to have European fertiliser tariffs removed.
We're going over to meet with the Ministry for Agriculture and the Environment in Spain, and I suppose we're at the moment, and over the last few months, we've put a lot of work into a project on trying to get anti-dumping tariffs and the import duties removed from the fertiliser. And it's based on the IFPRI report that IFA has done that showed that those duties are costing European farmers €1 billion per year. Put that in an Irish context, you're talking about 50 to 70 million euros at a time when every euro counts. And you were at the meeting here tonight, Anthony, so you saw the different sectors, and they were all so genuine, absolutely genuine in their, I suppose, despair at the prices that's there for all the sectors. The last one that was highlighted there was the tillage, the beef, the dairy came up, and so every euro counts, and 50 to 70 million euros is a lot in Irish farmers' context. So,
and realistically, did the IFA have the muscle to, I suppose, lobby against the most well-funded lobby group that there is in terms of the fertiliser companies?
Look, the IFA has power, and we go over there tomorrow. We've written to all the EU farm organisations. We've spoken to a lot of them at this stage. We've written to all the ministers for agriculture or the environment, or in some places their minister for food, take it whatever way you want, but the most appropriate minister, we'd have written to them all right across the EU. Also written to the MEPs and the Commissioner, and we'd have met a lot of the Irish MEPs, and we'd also have met a number of MEPs from other countries to highlight the injustice that's there with the import duties and the dumping tariffs. So we'll keep the job of work up. And like we have seen in the meantime that the price difference, because of the work that IFA are doing, the price drop from springtime to now has been the highest in the last 9 years in the fertiliser. It's no coincidence that coincides with the work that IFA are doing with EU or with fertiliser companies in the EU and indeed outside the EU.
And you said from a personal point of view, you said at the meeting tonight that you won't be surprised if just in terms of Brexit, you won't be surprised if Britain don't leave the EU or remain in the EU. What do you mean by that, or do you still stand by that?
Yeah, look, it's my own personal opinion. I won't say that it's the organisation's opinion, and maybe on a personal level it's the heart ruling the head, in the sense that I can't see any positive from an Irish agriculture point of view of the UK exiting the EU, and especially given the fact that we export over 40% of our agri-food exports goes to the UK, over half of our beef, which is over €1 billion worth, almost €1 billion worth of dairy products, and then you have the mushrooms and the poultry, and a lot of the other sectors as well exporting to the UK. So it's a big loss to us, and it's the uncertainty that it's creating at the moment, and that uncertainty is being used as an excuse by the factories to pull the beef prices when there's no other justifiable basis for them to do so. That doesn't surprise me, having written about beef prices for the past 12 years. Doesn't surprise me, but it disappoints me.
So
because
processors are unfairly targeting farmers.
that's we can't see it any other way. And we highlighted on the day of the Brexit, and we highlighted it since, the need for calmness and the likes of the processors, and indeed all sectors, to act responsibly. And we feel that the processors are not acting responsibly at the moment.
Joe Hiddy, thank you very much.
The Irish Farmers Journal weekly podcast, brought to you by Ornua, the home of Irish dairy.
And the next morning, Anthony was in County Leitrim, where farmers are worried about the increasing presence of forestry companies on local land. Andrew Doyle, the junior minister in charge of forestry, was at the meeting, and he said he would review the public notice period before forestry can be planted.
It's nice to have come up here and hear the people's views. I think the point was made that they normally expect that they'll have to go to Dublin, but I think it's only fair to get a flavour of the feelings of the general public and the community up here about the issue that was a afforestation programme and the challenges it presents to the local communities and farmers in particular. I understand, I am a farmer. I have some land planted, some very recently, some over 20 years on very marginal land. So I farm in a similar type of environment, and I empathise. I think it's all the things that came up there was a level playing pitch, balance, and the side notice thing, I think, which were the main issues.
And you talk about a level playing pitch. That's in terms of the credit that banks are issuing for people who are planting land and not planting land. Do you think, what are the government going to do about that? Because that's obviously a big issue between young farmers that want to go out there and buy land, which kind of they feel isn't being fairly, they're not being fairly loaned for.
Quite aside from the competition with forestry companies or for forestry, it's a big issue no matter where you go across the country from the point of view of young farmers and access to credit with good business plans and solidly built up business plans.
Is Leitrim not a bit different though, because this is a specific example?
Well, yes, the issue is more specific. Leitrim is different insofar as that forestry is the competitor. But in other parts, and I presume around even some of the towns here during the boom, the developer was the competitor, And where I come from and down the country all over, we've seen it in the so-called Celtic Tiger, where the competitor to farmers was another farmer who had sold land for development, maybe a very small parcel of land, and was able to go out and compete against a young farmer that was trying to actually expand a piece of land beside him, and that became a major issue at the time. In Leitrim, there's a history of it from listening inside going back 30 years, but I think one man, Pat, made a very valid point about, and Adrian from IFA made a very valid point about the whole good trust and relationship, and it was a gentleman's agreement Pat made a few years ago. I seen this happen in Wicklow in 1994. A 300-acre farm was sold. Quilchaba had to put Christmas trees on it. And there was negotiations at the time by the IFA to a young farmer who was developing a dairy herd to buy a 40-acre block next door to him, and Quilcha sold it to him. Now, the irony of it is the land, they exited the Christmas tree market and the land has been sold off in portions since. Some of it hasn't been anything done with it, but will be. But that just gives you an example of where you can have competitive, different reasons for competition that marginalise a local farmer. But I think,
given the kind of emotive nature of this, do you feel and how against people are of investors coming in and planting the land and getting payments for it? Do you think maybe a restriction on foreign investors coming in could be looked at now, given the public outcry about them doing it?
Well, that wasn't the only issue in there, in fairness. The other issue was the double payment, which in other parts of the country is seen as an incentive, like that farmers shouldn't get the premium, the basic payment scheme, and the afforestation premium, the forestry premium.
Because specifically on the restrictions, do you think that should...
If you do that, you're actually restricting a young farmer or an old farmer from planting 20 acres or 20% or 30% of the land that's marginal and looking at the balance of it. And, like some people would look at it in other countries, and I'll talk about other counties, where every time a child is born you would plant a hectare, so that would be their investment down, and would be usually broadleaves in that case. But there are a whole lot of different factors. So one solution for one person can be a problem for another and deem it to be unfair. So getting a balance is very difficult. But to try to be seen to level the playing pitch, to put that and level the playing pitch is about a credit, and it's about notice. I think
And just finally, there was calls to identify how much actually of Leitrim is planted at the moment. I know you said 16.8%. Are you going to? Is this the actual figure for now, or are you going to do?
that's the official figure. I mean, that is the official figure.
Is that not a bit? That's obviously very high. Is there maybe calls to maybe halt it now? Is that the quota? Is that where we stop?
Well, there was a couple of different messages there, but maybe not that far apart. It was to stop major. I think a lot of people would like to see. Wouldn't want to block it completely, because there's certainly land and farms that where the economic model going into the future for a young farmer might be, I'm going to buy a portion of land, I'm going to plant some of it, it's going to help fund the other, and I'll have an investment. You know, they're like, but level the playing pitch in the first place, I think, is the issue here. Yeah.
Andrew Doyle, thank you very much.
You're listening to the Irish Farmers Journal podcast, brought to you by Ornua, the home of Irish dairy.
This is the time of year for lungworm. Rebecca Carroll of Animal Health Ireland was at the Beef 2016 event last week, and she gave William Conlon some advice on how to deal with this parasite.
Well, I suppose lungworm can be very significant, particularly in young animals, so young calves and maybe even animals second year at grazing. So I suppose the first thing to do is to be sure that you keep a very close eye on young animals and older animals as well. Any coughing, you do need to act quickly, so go in with a dose at that point. If the coughing or the level of infection is significant, you may well need to move them off the pasture or consider using a product that's a long-acting product, so that they have protection for a number of weeks. So I suppose the thing about lungworm is just to be very vigilant and keep an eye on animals.
And would you encourage blanket dosage, or would you encourage just to do whoever's coughing, or what would be your advice?
Well, I suppose the thing about lungworm is that you do want to allow animals to have some exposure so that they develop immunity for later in the year and for the following year. So you shouldn't kind of go in ahead of time, but you should keep a close eye. As soon as you see any coughing, you should go in and dose the group at that point.
And for July, is there any other diseases that farmers need to be aware of or need to look out for more so maybe than other times of the year?
Well, I suppose cattle are at grass, so all the parasites are important. Your gutworms, liver fluke, all those things can be an issue at the moment. Things like red water can be significant at this time of year as well. If you're in an area with a problem with red water, that's always something you need to keep an eye out for at this time of year.
And I suppose with red water, especially, prevention is better than a cure.
Yeah, well, there's a couple of ways of dealing with red water, either trying to use some tick prevention or going in and treating for the parasite itself, but you should talk to your vet about what exactly is best on your farm.
Thank you very much, Rebecca.
Okay, thanks very much.
We hope that you're enjoying this Irish Farmers Journal podcast, brought to you by Ornua, the home of Irish dairy. Find out more at farmersjournal.ie.
William also discussed the best ways of managing grassland in the coming weeks with Teagasc dry stock specialist Gary Fisher.
Month of July, William, for grazing management, farmers need to begin in now, if they haven't already topped, go in and top swards. And when I mean top swards, I mean to go in with maybe a disc mower. So you're cleaning off the sward the same height as you would maybe with someone cutting silage. So you're cutting off everything. It's not looking cosmetically good from the road, but you're going in and actually doing a good job, so the plant actually tillers and you have a nice clean sward coming back again. Other tips for July: generally grass growth dips off badly in July, as most farmers would agree with you, particularly this year. You need to begin in now applying nitrogen, and maybe a bit of phosphate, especially in the northwest where a lot of damage has been done with the amount of rainfall. So a bit of phosphate there as well, along with their nitrogen, to help pair any root damage that has been done. So I'd be sort of saying little fertiliser now and often. Make sure paddies are cleaned out at this time of year, so you have nice clean grass going forward now for the rest of the season. Going down through the countryside today, a lot of fields mismanaged at this time of the year. Cattle and grazing swards that are a lot of seed head, a lot of grass up nearly a foot high. I always sort of say, I shouldn't say it, I think of my working hours in at 10 out at 4, so it's in at 10 centimetres and out at 4 centimetres. Now it's not easy done with the weather we're having, but ideally you want to go in at around 10 centimetres and graze down as quickly. So grow in 3 weeks and graze in 3 days is a good simple message for a lot of dry stock farmers.
And coming into the back end?
And coming into the back end, you're going to be trying to lengthen out your rotation length, because grass growth dips off, especially when you get into August. Again, for dry stock farmers, I'd be sort of advising that don't be waiting to the 14th of September to apply your fertiliser. Apply your fertiliser maybe mid-August, where you're going to get a better return for your fertiliser, and you'll build up more grass if you apply in August rather than waiting on to September. Fertiliser is well back in price, and the cheapest feed that you can produce is good high DMD grass.
Thank you very much, Jerry.
The Irish Farmers Journal weekly podcast, brought to you by Ornua, the home of Irish dairy.
Finally, Irish Country Living editor Mairead Lavery was in County Carlow this week, where a whole range of initiatives are underway to attract visitors. She met Eileen O'Rourke, the Chief Executive of Carlow Tourism.
Tonight is the culmination of a number of months' work in respect of the South Carlow Adventure Trail, which links all the activity providers, and then the walking product on the other side. Then the food trail brings all the food producers together, and then also the actual companies that are selling in Carlow as well. So they mightn't be open to visitors, but they still have a very important food product. And then, of course, Ireland's Ancient East is so important to Carlow. There are 4 key themes in it, 3 of which really match what Carlow is offering: Ancient Ireland, Anglo-Ireland, and also Early Christian Ireland. So it was really important for the industry to hear about it and to see how they can tap into it and benefit from it.
Yeah, and I think they were all delighted with how it went this evening. Tourism, is it important to County Carlow?
Oh, it is. I mean, on a daily basis, our overseas visitors account for 1,020 jobs, 365 days of the year, and that doesn't take into account the domestic market, and they probably account for about another 500. So it is a very important sector. We're seeing a lot of new tourism products come on stream in recent years, and then literally in the last 2 weeks we've had Welsh Whisky Distillery opening, and their aim is to have 75,000 visitors into their whisky exhibition by 2021. So they're all really important things for Carlow.
Certainly the whisky thing has taken off like nobody's business.
Yes, and this is going to be the largest independent distillery in Ireland, so it really is a fabulous attraction. Sits very well in the landscape, as though it's been there for far longer than it actually is, and the fact that we will have an attraction the likes similar to Jameson in Middleton and in Dublin, and if you look at the Guinness Storehouse, we also have number one in the country, 1.2 million visitors, and we also have a craft brewing exhibition opening up in Bagnallstown in November, and that's by Carlow Brewing Company, who are very big producers of craft beers in Ireland.
Okay, now you have a huge event coming up later in the month of July.
We have the Carlow Garden Festival coming for 10 days from the 23rd of July until the 1st of August. It is one of the biggest events that we have in the county. We have all manner of gardening personalities from home and overseas, nature experts, garden designers, garden writers, and they all come to Carlow for these 10 days.
Well, you really have. I mean, you've Dermot Gavin, you've Dermot O'Neill, you've Helen Dillon, is it Niall Potter from Mount Stewart? There's just an amazing lineup.
Yes, and I suppose what we've tried to do in recent years is fully recognising the quality of the gardening experts in Ireland, but we've tried to bring in some UK experts as well that Irish people probably wouldn't have ready access to. It's not every day that you'd actually get to see John Massey, who won a gold in Chelsea, or James Alexander Sinclair, who's a Chelsea judge, and to get his kind of angle on things. So it's to try and mix it and to bring in new faces into the festival as well.
Well, now you'll have to bring Country Magazine the next time, because we've got 2 golds in blue.
Yes.
Anyway, look, can I wish you every success with the festival, which starts on the
23rd of July with Dear McGavin.
Yeah, to the 1st of August.
Till the 1st of August.
And there's a huge range of speakers and events right across the county. And congratulations on all the other festivals that you're planning, and for the food trail, the adventure trail, and the garden trail. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mairead.
The Irish Farmers Journal podcast, online at farmersjournal.ie, on the Irish Farmers Journal app, and on iTunes every Thursday. Brought to you by Ornua, the home of Irish dairy.